The tension at the Thanksgiving table was palpable when my son spat, "You should have left years ago." Still, I held my ground, slowly setting my fork down, the silence thick between us. The smell of turkey, once a symbol of family, now felt like a trap. While they argued, I realized how long I'd sacrificed for them, my marriage, my peace, while they took me for granted. That's when it hit me. I didn't need to stay. The house was gone, along with the chains that bound me, and this time, I was free. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The Thanksgiving table was set in Elaine Matthews' home, the long, worn wood of the dining room table groaning under the weight of the meal. The house was warm, cozy, the smell of roasted turkey and mashed potatoes filling the air. The once loved family home, its walls echoing memories of years past, felt oddly distant tonight, as if the holiday traditions had lost their warmth. The table, a centerpiece of countless Thanksgivings, now felt like an arena where tension brewed just below the surface. David, her 38-year-old son, was already seated, leaning back in his chair, a glass of wine dangling carelessly between his fingers. His eyes flitted over the table, an air of superiority in his posture, as if he were critiquing every detail. Elaine, as she carefully placed the last dish of cranberry sauce on the table, caught his gaze. She tried not to flinch. David's presence was often like a weight in the room, suffocating any attempt at civility. "Honestly, I don't know why old people get to eat first," David muttered under his breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. He looked over at Mark, his father, who was busy carving the turkey, trying to ignore the remark. Elaine's hand paused midair, the spoon she was holding momentarily suspended as she processed the words. The silence around the table grew thick. She kept her eyes trained on the food in front of her, willing herself not to react. But David's words had already done their damage. She had spent years fighting for peace in this family, and now, her son seemed determined to break every semblance of harmony. "David," she said softly, trying to maintain composure, "we've been over this. Let's just enjoy dinner." But David wasn't listening. His eyes darted from Sarah, who was seated beside him, to the food, then back at Elaine. "Honestly, it's all just so outdated," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "I mean, who even cares about these old traditions? It's just food, and boring food at that." Elaine bit down on her tongue. Every word he said felt like a slap, each one more cutting than the last. She saw Mark trying to catch her eye, his silent plea for calm, but she refused to look away. David was playing his game, making sure everyone knew how superior he felt in this moment, and she wasn't going to let him win this time. "David," Mark finally spoke up, attempting to steer the conversation away from the growing hostility. "Maybe we can—" But David wasn't interested in Mark's peacekeeping. With a sharp exhale, he threw his napkin down on the table, the sound too loud for something so small. "I'm not interested in pretending everything's fine, Dad. You know, this whole charade, this house, it's all just a big joke." Elaine's heart skipped. She knew where this was headed. She could feel the familiar sting of David's words, each one designed to wound, but she wasn't prepared for what came next. She didn't see it coming. Not from him. Not at this table. Without warning, David's voice rose, bitter and cutting, slicing through the warm air like a knife. "You should have left years ago, then maybe none of this mess would have happened." The words hung in the air, a terrible silence swallowing the room. Elaine froze. Her body went rigid as the weight of his statement crashed down on her. For a moment, the room spun and everything around her, the house, the table, the food, disappeared into a blur. All she could hear was her son's voice, the words sinking into her chest like a jagged shard of glass. Her pulse quickened, blood rushing to her ears. The world outside that table disappeared, leaving only David's cold, angry words reverberating in her mind. "You should have left years ago." Her breath hitched as she locked eyes with him, disbelief written across her face. Was this really her son? Had he really just said that? In front of everyone? Mark's face twisted in discomfort, his hand reaching out to touch Elaine's arm, but she barely noticed. She couldn't breathe. The humiliation, the anger, everything hit her like a tidal wave. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest as she fought to keep her composure. "David," Elaine whispered, her voice shaking, barely above a breath. "How dare you?" But her words didn't matter. David just leaned back in his chair, taking a sip of his wine like he had said nothing at all, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. He had said it. He had broken her in front of everyone. Mark, ever the peacemaker, cleared his throat awkwardly, glancing between Elaine and David. "Let's just all calm down," he began, his voice low and soothing. "We're here to—" But Elaine was done. She wasn't going to let Mark fix this. Not this time. Her gaze never left David, her voice cold and steady as she spoke again, quieter but more firm. "You have no right to talk to me like that." There was a long pause as the tension in the room thickened, every eye on Elaine. David, caught in his own arrogance, only gave a slight shrug, as if it didn't matter. Elaine's chest tightened with fury, but she swallowed it down. The room around her felt suffocating. She had spent so long pretending, enduring this, him, for the sake of family. But no more. Without another word, she stood up from the table, the chair scraping against the floor. All eyes were on her now. She couldn't stay here. Not after what he'd said. As she walked out of the room, her eyes burned, a mixture of shame, anger, and betrayal. She couldn't believe it. Her son had just told her to leave, as if she was nothing. As she closed the door behind her, she felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones. And in that stillness, she knew one thing for sure. This was the last straw. The fight was only just beginning. Elaine shut the door to her bedroom with a quiet click, the weight of the silence pressing in on her. The house, once filled with laughter and the bustle of family, felt hollow now. The sounds of the table being cleared and the murmur of voices from downstairs were distant, muffled, as if she were drifting in a fog of her own emotions. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her fingers gripping the edge of her sweater tightly. Her heart was pounding, a furious rhythm that wouldn't slow. Her chest ached. The words David had said echoed relentlessly in her mind, each repetition more painful than the last. "You should have left years ago." How could he say that? Her throat tightened and she pressed her palms into her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to break free. She had been the one who had always given, always sacrificed. For him, for Mark, for this family. And this was how she was repaid. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed Clara's number, needing the comfort of a familiar voice. It rang twice before Clara picked up, her tone bright, a stark contrast to the storm inside Elaine. "Elaine? How's everything going? How was dinner?" Elaine could feel her lip tremble, but she quickly steadied herself. She had to talk about this. She had to let it out before it consumed her. "Clara, I don't know what to do anymore." There was a beat of silence on the other end, then Clara's voice softened. "What happened, Elaine? What's going on? I just, I can't believe it, he said it." Elaine's words tumbled out in a rush, the hurt flooding her voice. "David, he told me I should have left years ago. In front of everyone, Clara. Like I didn't matter. Like I've been nothing but a burden to him." Clara's voice hardened slightly, the warmth in it turning to a quiet fury. "That's a low blow. He had no right to say that to you. No right at all." Elaine felt a burst of anger flicker inside her, but it was quickly drowned by the deep ache of betrayal. I've spent my whole life trying to make sure they were happy, trying to keep everything together, and this is how he treats me, how they all treat me. I've been invisible in my own family, Clara. Elaine, listen to me. Clara's voice was firm, insistent now. You deserve respect. You've given them everything, and what have they given you in return? Nothing. And David, he needs to learn consequences. He's an adult now, and he has to take responsibility for how he treats you. You don't need to tolerate that anymore. Elaine let the words sink in. Clara was right. She didn't need to tolerate it. But the thought of changing everything, of standing up to David, of making a break, terrified her. The years of conditioning, the endless giving, the quiet suffering had built up inside her, creating an unshakable belief that family was supposed to come first, that she had to endure for the sake of the ones she loved. But now she could feel something different stirring inside her. A fire, one she hadn't realized was there, waiting to be kindled. I've spent so much time just holding everything together for them, Elaine said quietly, more to herself than to Clara. David's selfishness, Mark's avoidance. I've always just kept my mouth shut, kept everything running, kept everything from falling apart. But tonight I finally see it. It's been all for nothing. I've been so focused on them, on what they need, that I lost sight of what I need. Clara's voice softened, a trace of concern still there, but also a sense of quiet pride. It's not too late to change that, Elaine. You've spent your whole life bending for others. You've earned the right to finally take care of yourself. Don't let David's words control you. Let this be the moment you take back what's yours. Elaine's breath hitched, the weight of Clara's words settling in her chest. The fury inside her was starting to take shape, crystallizing into something she could use. She didn't have to keep doing this. She didn't have to live like this anymore. She reached for her phone and checked the notifications. As expected, there was a message from David. A quick, insincere apology. Sorry if I hurt you. Didn't mean it that way. Let's talk later, okay? Elaine stared at the screen, the words feeling as hollow as the air between them. A part of her wanted to respond, to forgive him as she always did. But another part, the stronger part, rose up in her. She wasn't going to let him off the hook this time. Not this time. She tossed her phone on the bed, her hands shaking with a mix of anger and determination. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She didn't need his apology. What she needed was change, real change, and she was going to make it happen. Her mind raced, heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the shift within her, the realization that she had been standing still for too long. She couldn't wait for someone else to change. She had to take control. She had to make the decision for herself. Elaine stood up from the bed, pacing across the room. The floorboards creaked beneath her, mirroring the unease stirring in her gut. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose. David had crossed the line, and she wasn't going to let him, or anyone else, cross it again. With a deep breath, she grabbed her phone once more. This time, it wasn't an apology she would send. She would take the next step. The next morning, Elaine sat at her kitchen table, her fingers lightly tapping the ceramic mug of coffee in front of her. The steam curled upward, dissipating in the early light that filtered through the half-open blinds. It should have felt peaceful, but the silence of the house was deafening. The memories of last night, David's words, her anger, the weight of the decisions that lay ahead, hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. She had spent the night turning things over in her mind, reliving the scene over and over, each time seeing it more clearly. David had pushed her to the brink. It wasn't just about what he'd said, though that stung deeply. It was about the years of being unseen, of being expected to sacrifice everything while they went on living their lives with little thought for hers. And she was done. With a deep breath, she reached for her phone and dialed John Carter's number. He'd been her lawyer for years, practical and reliable, someone she could trust. The phone rang, and after a few seconds his familiar voice came through the line. "Elaine? How's everything going?" She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "John, I need to sell the house." There was a brief pause, then the sound of John shifting in his chair. "I see. I figured it was only a matter of time before you made that call." Elaine felt a tightness in her chest, but her voice was steady. "I've had enough. I can't keep living like this, John. David, he's crossed a line, and I need to take control of my life. This house. It's too much. The memories. The weight of it all. It's just too much." She could hear the shift in John's tone, his professional instincts kicking in. "Elaine, you know that selling the house will create some friction, right? David will likely be upset, and Sarah may not take it well either." "I know," Elaine said firmly, "but I'm done putting everyone else first. For once, I need to put myself first. I've spent my entire life trying to hold everything together for them, and where has that gotten me? Nowhere." Another pause. John was silent for a moment, perhaps weighing his words carefully. "I understand, Elaine, but just be prepared for the fallout. There will be consequences, and they won't be easy. I'll help you with the paperwork and make sure everything's in order, but you have to be ready for what comes next." Elaine's hand tightened around the phone, her jaw set. "I'm ready, John. I don't want to be invisible anymore." "All right," John said, his voice steady. "I'll start the process and have everything ready. But know that this decision, this change, isn't just about the house. It's about reclaiming your life." Elaine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She had made the call. The first step had been taken. After ending the call, she sat back, staring at the quiet space around her. The kitchen was just as it always had been, familiar, safe even. But now it felt like it was closing in on her, as if the walls themselves were urging her to take that next step. She reflected on her life, all the years spent giving, being the one who held it all together. Mark had always been the passive observer, caught between her and David, never quite able to make a stand. David had always taken, expected, and never once acknowledged the toll it had taken on her. And Sarah, sweet Sarah, had always been the peacekeeper, never fully able to understand the weight of the choices Elaine had made. But those choices had been hers, every last one of them. She had spent so many years swallowing her feelings, keeping the peace, trying to be everything for everyone. She had been so focused on making sure everyone else was happy that she had forgotten about herself. She had let David walk all over her, thinking that was the way it had to be. But it didn't. Not anymore. She pushed herself to her feet and moved toward the hallway, where she found Mark standing near the stairs, looking at the photos that lined the walls. The photos of their children, of their life together. His expression was soft, reflective. And when he saw her, he immediately stepped forward. "Elaine?" His voice was cautious, unsure, but there was a deep sadness in his eyes. She didn't waste time. "I've made my decision. I'm selling the house." Mark's face faltered. "What? Elaine, are you sure about this?" Her gaze met his, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something. Power, perhaps, or courage. She had always worried about how Mark would react, about the strain it might put on their marriage. But now, she didn't care. This wasn't about him or David. This was about her. "I'm sure, Mark, I'm done. I can't live in this house anymore. The memories, the tension, it's too much for me to bear. I need to move on." Mark's hand went to his forehead, a weary sigh escaping his lips. Elaine, I understand that you're hurt, but this is the family home. We've built a life here. What are you going to do? Elaine took a deep breath, her chest tight with the weight of her decision. I'm going to start over, Mark. For me, it's time. I've spent too many years trying to hold everything together. Now it's my turn. He stood there, speechless, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. She could see it in his eyes. He didn't fully understand, didn't know how to react. But she wasn't asking for his approval. She was asking for his understanding. Finally, Mark nodded slowly. Okay, he said, his voice quiet, almost resigned. I support you. If this is what you need, then I'll back you. Elaine didn't know if it was his support or the weight of her own decision, but something shifted inside her. She felt a sense of relief, a lightness she hadn't known in years. She had taken the first step. And now, there was no turning back. Elaine sat in the quiet of the living room, her fingers nervously curling around the edges of the sofa cushion. She had barely slept, her thoughts swirling relentlessly, but now she had a decision to make. She had taken control of her life in one important way, but now came the hard part, the fallout. It was time to tell David. The thought made her stomach twist in knots, but she couldn't keep hiding from the inevitable. David would react. She knew that much, and it wouldn't be pretty. She took a deep breath, picking up her phone. She hadn't spoken to him since the Thanksgiving dinner. He had sent a text the night before, one of his usual insincere apologies. Sorry if I hurt you. Didn't mean it that way. Let's talk later. She had ignored it. There was nothing to say. No more pretending. The house was eerily quiet as she typed the message. She didn't want to engage in a back and forth. She just needed to say it, to put the words out there. David, I've decided to sell the house. I'm moving on. This is what's best for me. There. Simple. Direct. She hit send, feeling the weight of the words land like bricks. A moment of silence passed before the phone buzzed in her hand. It was David. What the hell, Mom? You can't be serious. This is petty. You're throwing away the family's home like it means nothing. Her heart raced as she read the message. She could feel his anger seeping through the text, each word dripping with accusation. She sat for a moment, letting the tension settle in her chest before she typed a reply. It's not petty, David. It's what I need to do. This is about me. Not you, not anyone else. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she waited for his next response, but it didn't come immediately. Instead, the front door opened and Sarah walked in, looking as though she had just returned from a walk or running errands. She paused when she saw Elaine sitting there, her expression tentative, like she was uncertain about entering a room filled with invisible landmines. I saw David's car, Sarah said, her voice softer than usual. What's going on? Elaine straightened up, taking a steadying breath. She wasn't ready for another conversation with David yet, not until she was clear in her own mind. But she knew Sarah would expect an explanation, whether David had told her anything or not. I told him I'm selling the house, Elaine replied, her voice calm but firm. It's time to make a change. For me. Sarah's face tightened, and she looked away for a moment. Elaine could see the hesitation in her daughter-in-law's eyes, the conflict. Sarah was stuck between her husband and her mother-in-law, always trying to keep the peace, never fully stepping into one camp or the other. I don't agree with David's behavior, Sarah said quietly, her voice low. But It's hard, Elaine. I don't know what to say. Elaine gave her a weary smile, the corners of her mouth pulling tight. She appreciated Sarah's honesty, even if it wasn't easy for her to speak up. I know, Sarah. It's not easy for anyone, but I'm doing what's right for me. She paused. letting the words sink in. There was nothing more to say about that. Nothing Sarah could offer that would change her mind. The phone buzzed again. David had responded, and this time the text was longer, more desperate. "This is ridiculous. You're going to ruin everything. You're throwing away your family's future for what? So you can feel better about yourself?" Elaine's pulse quickened, but she didn't let herself react. She had already made the decision. She wasn't backing down now. Still, she couldn't stop the sense of guilt from creeping into her mind. Am I making a mistake? But no, this wasn't a mistake. This was her life, and she wasn't going to let David, or anyone else, take it from her. Before she could respond, the phone rang. Clara. Elaine quickly answered, knowing that her best friend would provide the reassurance she needed. "Elaine, how are you holding up?" Clara's voice was warm, but with an edge of concern. "I told David," Elaine said simply, "and he's not happy about it." "I figured," Clara replied, her tone knowing. "But you're doing the right thing, Elaine. You've been taking care of everyone else for years. It's time to take care of yourself. Don't let David guilt-trip you into thinking you're wrong." Elaine nodded, feeling a small sense of relief wash over her. "I know, but it's still hard." "I get it. But don't let him manipulate you. He's going to try. He'll try to play the victim, make you feel guilty. But don't let him. You're stronger than that." "I'm trying," Elaine said, the weight of the decision heavy in her voice. "But he's making it hard." "I know he is. But this is about you now. You're reclaiming your life, your happiness. You've earned it." Elaine's shoulders relaxed as she listened to Clara's words. She wasn't alone in this. She had someone who truly understood. The phone buzzed again. It was David, yet another text. "I'm not going to just sit by and let you destroy everything. If you sell this house, I'm going to make sure you regret it." Elaine's fingers hovered over the phone, her heart pounding. She could feel the tension in her chest, the weight of his anger pulling at her. But she didn't give in. She stood tall, even if only in her own mind, and typed her reply. "Do what you have to do, David. I'm not going to be intimidated anymore. This is what's best for me. And I'm done pretending." She hit send, the words final, and then let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The silence that followed was almost deafening, but it was different now. It wasn't the same silence that had weighed her down before. This was a silence of liberation, a silence filled with the promise of something new. And for the first time in a long time, Elaine felt something shift inside her, a quiet, unwavering certainty. The next chapter had begun. The days following Elaine's decision to sell the house stretched on like an endless expanse of silence, the kind of silence that settles between people when words can no longer repair the distance. The house, which had always been a hub of activity, now felt like a hollow shell, a space where once there was life, now only tension and hesitation lingered. Elaine could feel it every time she walked into a room. The way Mark avoided her gaze, the way Sarah would offer her a smile but look away quickly, as though unsure of how to approach her. The rift was there, and it was undeniable. Mark, ever the passive one, had said little since she'd made her announcement. He remained neutral, but Elaine could feel the unease simmering just beneath his calm exterior. He never outright disagreed with her decision, but he couldn't hide the discomfort in his eyes whenever the topic of the house came up. "Elaine, I don't know," he said one evening, his voice low as they sat side by side on the couch. "It's the family home. You know how much this means to David, and to Sarah. It's not easy for anyone." Elaine, who had spent so many years tiptoeing around Mark's need for peace, felt her resolve harden. She didn't have time for half-hearted support. This was about her. Not David. Not Mark. Her. "I know it's hard," she replied, her voice steady. even though her chest tightened. But I can't keep living like this, Mark. You can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it isn't. Mark sighed, rubbing his forehead. I'm not pretending, He trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. His eyes flickered to her, then away again. You're doing this for you, right? I am, she said firmly, her gaze never leaving his. I have to. There was no further conversation on the matter that night. Mark, unable to choose a side, fell back into his silent neutrality, letting the tension hang thick between them. Elaine knew he loved her, but this was not something he was willing to fight for. Not when it meant upsetting David. Clara's voice came through the phone again that evening, a comforting reminder that Elaine wasn't alone in this. Elaine, how are you holding up? Clara asked, her tone both caring and perceptive. Honestly, I don't know anymore, Elaine admitted, sinking into the armchair. Mark's just avoiding everything. He's not supporting me, not in the way I need, and David won't even talk to me. Clara's voice softened. It's going to be tough. You know David needs to learn that there are consequences to his actions. You've been giving him everything, and now he's turning his back on you because you're finally taking care of yourself. That's not right. Elaine sighed, a knot in her throat. I know, but the silence. It's suffocating. The house feels empty, even though I'm surrounded by everyone. I get it, Elaine, but this is a necessary change. It's hard to see that right now, but you're doing the right thing. Don't let David manipulate you into thinking you're wrong. Stand firm. He'll come around. Elaine nodded, her grip on the phone tightening. Clara's words were the lifeline she needed. She would stand firm. But standing firm meant enduring the aftermath. For the next few days, David refused to speak to her. The house became a battlefield of passive-aggressive silence. Whenever she entered a room, she could feel the weight of his absence, his anger hanging in the air like smoke. He would be in his room, texting or making calls, never acknowledging her presence. Elaine couldn't decide if she should be grateful for the silence or desperate to break through it. There was a heaviness now whenever she passed his room, a lingering unease that twisted in her gut. She had decided she wouldn't cave. She wouldn't let David's anger dictate her actions. She would see this through. But then, late one evening, the first of the messages came. Why are you doing this? This is a mistake, Mom. You're ruining everything. You're selfish. Elaine stared at the screen, her hand trembling for a moment. The words felt familiar, but they didn't carry the same weight they once had. She knew exactly what he was trying to do. Guilt her into reversing her decision. He always played the victim, making her feel like the villain when she made a move to prioritize herself. She set the phone down, took a deep breath, and didn't reply. But the messages didn't stop. Over the next few days, there were more. Calls, texts, even missed voicemails. His tone escalated from frustration to anger to outright threats. You can't sell the house. I'll stop it. You'll regret this. Elaine's chest tightened as the phone buzzed again. Another text. Another demand. But this time, something inside her clicked. She felt the pulse of her own strength, the certainty that this was the right path. She picked up the phone, tapped out a response, and hit send. Do what you have to do, David. I've made my decision. This isn't about you anymore. The phone buzzed again almost immediately, but she didn't look. She didn't need to. This time, the silence between them was hers to control. The following day, Elaine met with John Carter again to finalize the legalities of the sale. She had been working through the paperwork, making sure everything was in place. Her focus was sharp, her resolve unshakable. The future was no longer a thing she had to wait for. She was building it herself. David's anger would come, and it would be loud. But it would also be the last thing that had a hold on her. The day the house officially went on the market, Elaine felt the weight of it settle in her bones. It wasn't the kind of weight that crushed her, but the kind that signified a major shift. She stood in the doorway, her hands resting on the worn wood of the frame, staring out at the house that had been so full of life once, but now felt like a museum of past versions of herself. The walls, once filled with laughter and family gatherings, now echoed only the memories of those moments. The kitchen, where she'd spent years cooking for holidays and birthdays, stood quiet and empty, its counters cleared, the familiar scents long gone. The living room, where she'd spent countless nights watching TV with Mark, now felt cold and barren, a room with only its furniture to remind her of years spent together. And upstairs, the rooms where her children had grown, now filled with nothing but the weight of years gone by. She felt something, though, a sense of relief. She didn't have to pretend anymore. She didn't have to keep fighting to hold on to something that no longer served her. The house, with all its history, was now just a memory, and she was ready to move on. Mark had been silent as usual during the process. He hadn't once questioned her decision, but he hadn't really supported it either. His presence was quiet, as he sat in the background, unsure how to navigate the rift between her and David. Mark's passivity was nothing new, but it hurt more now, with everything on the line. Elaine took a deep breath as she sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. The offers were coming in, but they were slow, tentative. No one seemed quite ready to take the plunge. It was the market. She knew that. But it didn't stop her from feeling like a part of her was still tethered to this place. Clara's voice broke through the quiet, a lifeline as always. "Elaine, how's it going?" Clara asked, her voice a familiar balm to the heaviness Elaine carried. "It's moving," Elaine replied, her tone steady but tired. "I'm working with the realtor, and the first few offers are trickling in. It's slow, but I think it's going to happen." "That's good, right?" Clara's voice was hopeful, but Elaine could hear the underlying concern. Elaine paused, considering. "It's good, but it's also strange. I'm letting go of so much. I feel like I'm tearing myself away from everything I've known for years." Clara was silent for a moment. "You're not tearing yourself away, Elaine. You're freeing yourself. You're moving on, and that's something to be proud of." Elaine nodded, though Clara couldn't see her. She had to keep reminding herself of that. She was moving forward. She was reclaiming her life. She wasn't tearing anything down. She was rebuilding. Later that evening, as she prepared dinner, the tension between David and Sarah was palpable. Elaine could hear them arguing, their voices rising from the other room. She was used to it by now, the endless back and forth between them. But today, it felt different. Today, it was David's anger that fueled the fire. "You can't just let her do this." David's voice was sharp, and Elaine could hear the bitterness in his tone. "You can't let her destroy everything we've worked for." Elaine took a deep breath, setting the knife down on the counter. She wasn't going to step into this. Not now. She had made her decision. Sarah's voice was quieter, calmer. "David, she's making a choice for herself. You can't keep treating her like she's not allowed to do what's best for her." Elaine felt a flicker of gratitude towards Sarah. She was finally starting to see things from Elaine's perspective. But it wasn't enough. David would never see it that way. As she sat at the table later that evening, trying to focus on her meal, her phone buzzed again. Another message from David. "You can't do this, Mom. I'm not going to let you throw our family's future away. If you sell the house, you'll regret it. It's too big a decision to make without thinking it through. You can't be serious about this." Elaine felt a familiar tightening in her chest. But this time, the words didn't sting as much. She had already heard them 1,000 times, each one meant to manipulate her, to make her doubt her decision. But she wasn't going to do that anymore. Her fingers hovered over the screen, and she typed her response. Firm, final. "David, I've thought this through. I'm not changing my mind. This is what's best for me. Please respect that." The phone buzzed immediately after she sent the message, and she knew it was another demand, another threat. But this time, she didn't look. She didn't need to. The first serious offer came in the next day, and Elaine felt a small surge of excitement. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to what she needed to move on. The buyer was eager and the terms were fair. She signed the paperwork, sending it back with a quick, decisive click. There was no turning back now. David tried once again to reach her, but this time, she ignored his calls and messages. She couldn't afford to let him pull her back into the toxic web he had woven. She had done enough. She had given enough. And now it was time for her to take control of her own life. Later that night, she sat down with Mark, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. She had done what she set out to do, and now the house would be gone. But what would be left behind? Mark, ever the silent observer, looked at her with a mixture of sadness and resignation in his eyes. "I guess this is it, huh?" he said quietly. Elaine nodded, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Yeah, this is it." The room was silent again, but this time it felt different. This wasn't the silence of avoidance. This was the silence of a new beginning. The days following Elaine's decision felt like a slow burn, the tension between her and David growing with every passing moment. His anger was a constant presence now, lurking just under the surface, ready to explode at any moment. Every phone call, every text was a fresh salvo in the battle he had waged to make her second-guess her decision. But Elaine had made up her mind, and nothing he said could sway her. She spent the week preparing for the final goodbye to the house. It wasn't just the sale, it was the end of a chapter. The house that had been home to so many memories, to the years spent raising her children, to the life she had built, was now slipping through her fingers. But as the days passed, the weight of it all didn't crush her. Instead, she felt a strange sense of liberation. Elaine moved through the rooms, packing up personal items, framed photos, keepsakes from birthdays and anniversaries, small trinkets that had once seemed so important. As she packed, she reflected on the years gone by. The kitchen, where she'd made countless meals for family dinners, the living room where she and Mark had sat together on quiet evenings, the bedrooms where her children had grown up. She touched each item gently, savoring the memories, but she didn't linger too long. The past was the past. She couldn't keep clinging to it. The house felt like a hollow shell now. It no longer held the joy it once did. The silence had replaced the laughter, and the absence of life had made it easier for Elaine to accept that this was the right decision. The clutter of years spent collecting things, building a life, now felt like weight she didn't want to carry any longer. She was ready to move on. As the days stretched on, David's anger only intensified. The messages continued, each one more frantic than the last. He accused her of ruining the family, of destroying everything they had worked for. "How could you do this? You're ruining everything. Do you even care about what you're doing?" Elaine read the messages, her pulse quickening. But her resolve didn't falter. She had already made the decision. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her anymore. But still, the words cut deeper than she cared to admit. They weren't just about the house. They were about the years of sacrifice, the years of holding everything together for him, for Mark, for the family. And now, after all that, this was how he responded. His anger was a reflection of his own selfishness, his refusal to see her as a person with needs beyond his own. Elaine picked up her phone, typed a quick response, and hit send. "David, this is not about you. I've made my decision. I'm done living for everyone else. You'll have to accept that." She set the phone down, her hands trembling slightly. But this time, the trembling was not from fear. It was from the realization that she was finally standing up for herself. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about selling a house. It was about reclaiming her life. Clara's voice broke through the quiet of the room once again. Elaine, how's it going? She asked, her voice gentle, a steadying force in the storm that raged around her. I'm making progress, Elaine replied, her voice steady. Packing up the house. The final offer is in, and I'm moving forward. It's happening. Clara's voice brightened, even over the phone. That's great. This is your time, Elaine. This is your chance to build the life you've always deserved. Elaine closed her eyes, allowing Clara's words to sink in. It's strange, she said quietly. I thought I'd feel more sad. But it's different. I'm relieved. It's time. Clara paused for a moment before responding. You've spent so long being everything for everyone else. Now it's your turn. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about that. Elaine nodded, her throat tight. Clara always knew what to say. She needed to keep that reminder in her heart. This wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming her life. The next day, as she continued packing, she could hear the growing tension between David and Sarah. It was subtle, but it was there. Sarah trying to stay neutral, David seething with resentment, unable to understand why Elaine wouldn't just give in. Sarah, too, had begun to see the cracks in David's behavior, but she was caught in the middle. Elaine could feel the distance between them growing. Sarah came into the living room, her face strained, her voice quiet. Elaine, I just want you to know that I don't agree with David's behavior, but it's hard. He's angry and I'm stuck in the middle. Elaine turned to face her daughter-in-law, feeling the weight of the words. I know, Sarah, but this isn't about you. This is about me. I have to do this. Sarah nodded, her lips pressed tight. She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't know how. Elaine could feel the strain, the tension, but she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Later that evening, as she finished packing up the last of her things, the phone buzzed again. Another text from David. You're making a huge mistake, you'll see. You'll regret this. It's not too late to fix things. Elaine read the message, her heart thudding in her chest. She took a moment to breathe, then picked up the phone, typing her reply with a calm, measured hand. I've made my decision. It's time for me to move on. Please stop trying to guilt me into changing my mind. She hit send, and the weight of it settled over her. This was it. No more second-guessing. No more going back. She had made her choice, and she wasn't going to let David, or anyone, make her feel small for it. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of resolution. The final day at the house arrived with a weight that Elaine could almost feel in her bones. The paperwork had been signed, the buyer had agreed to the terms, and now there was nothing left to do but let go. She stood at the front door, her hand resting lightly on the worn wood of the frame, her eyes taking in the view for the last time. The house that had been home for so many years, where her children had grown up, where Mark and she had weathered the storms of life, was now just a shell of memories. The air felt heavier than usual, laden with everything she was leaving behind. She had spent years in this house, watching her family grow, shaping a life within these walls. But now, the echo of those memories was all that remained. The laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments. All of it was fading into the past. Elaine wandered through the rooms for what felt like the 100th time, running her fingers over the surfaces, feeling the weight of years in the fading woodwork, the chipped paint, the floors that had once creaked with the footsteps of her children. The kitchen was the hardest to walk through, the place where so many meals had been prepared, where so much of her life had been poured into feeding those she loved. It was bare now, clean, almost sterile, but the memories of the countless dinners, the laughter over holiday meals, the quiet mornings spent over coffee lingered in the air. Her chest tightened as she stood there. but she couldn't afford to linger too long. There was a sense of finality now, and she had to face it. She moved to the living room next, where the couch sat empty, where Mark had once sat beside her watching the world pass by. Her fingers brushed against the fabric, and she was struck by a sudden pang of loss. This was the last time she would sit here, the last time she would gaze out of the windows, watching the seasons change. But there was relief too. Beneath the sadness, beneath the grief of leaving this chapter behind, there was a quiet sense of freedom. She had made this decision for herself. She wasn't running from anything. She was moving forward. This house, with all its history, had been a weight around her neck. And now it was time to let it go. Just as she closed the last drawer in the kitchen, her phone buzzed. She had been expecting it. David. She hesitated before answering, the weight of the past few weeks hanging over her. The silence between them had stretched for days, and she wasn't sure what to expect. "Mom." David's voice came through the phone, tentative, but with an edge of something unfamiliar. Guilt, perhaps. "Can we talk?" Elaine took a deep breath. She had known this moment was coming, and it still unsettled her. But she wasn't going to let him dictate how she felt anymore. "David," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We've talked about this. I've made my decision. I know, but I've been thinking about it and His voice faltered for a moment before continuing. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have said those things. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to hurt you." Elaine closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. For so long she had yearned for an apology, for David to finally see how much she had sacrificed for him, for the family. But now, as she listened to his words, she wasn't sure what to do with them. "I appreciate the apology, David," she said slowly. "But this isn't just about the house. This is about everything that's come before. I spent years trying to please everyone, trying to hold it all together for you, for Mark. But I've spent too long living for everyone else. This is my choice. And I'm not going to second guess it." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment Elaine thought he might hang up. But instead, she heard him let out a long breath. "I get it," he said quietly. "I do. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I've been selfish." Elaine felt something shift in her chest, a softening she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, she felt like David was truly seeing her. The real her. Not the mother who had been everything for him, but the woman who was now standing on her own 2 feet, making her own choices. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I hope we can find a way to move forward," David said, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable. Elaine swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I hope so too." The line went silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy with anger. It was different. It was the beginning of something new. After hanging up, Elaine sat down at the kitchen table, the quiet of the house wrapping around her like a blanket. It wasn't sadness that gripped her now, but a deep, aching relief. She had spent so many years thinking that she had to hold everything together, that she had to sacrifice everything for the people she loved. But now she realized it was time to live for herself. As she sat there, reflecting on the years gone by, Sarah entered the room, her expression uncertain. She looked like she had something to say, but wasn't sure how to say it. "Elaine," Sarah began softly, her voice tight. "I just wanted to apologize. I should have said something sooner. I should have stood up to David for you." Elaine reached out, touching Sarah's hand gently. "You don't need to apologize, Sarah. You've been caught in the middle, and I know that's not easy." Sarah looked down, her face full of regret. "But I should have been there for you. I should have said something sooner." Elaine squeezed her hand. "It's okay. You've done enough. I'm just glad that we're finally being honest with each other." The two women sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they had endured beginning to lift. It wasn't perfect. The family was fractured, but for the first time, Elaine felt like the pieces were starting to fall into place. David might still be angry. The house was still gone, but she had her freedom now. And for the first time in years, Elaine realized that she was finally, truly, living her own life. Elaine stood in the doorway of her new home, a sense of calm washing over her as she took in the modest space. The house was smaller, quieter, but it was hers. She had done it. She had stepped into a new chapter, one that she had only dreamed about in fleeting moments of solitude. The walls were bare, but they felt welcoming, as if the house itself was ready to embrace her. There was no weight here, no oppressive sense of history, no past that had to be carried around. The living room was light and airy, with windows that let in the sun, spilling warm golden light over the hardwood floors. It wasn't grand, but it didn't need to be. It was simple, peaceful, exactly what she had been searching for. There were no reminders of years spent in conflict or moments of unspoken resentment. Here, there was just the promise of new beginnings. Elaine let out a long breath, her heart racing with anticipation. She was no longer tethered to the past. She wasn't sure exactly where the future would take her, but for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe freely. Over the next few weeks, she dove headfirst into her new life. She started by unpacking the few boxes she had brought with her, carefully placing each item in its place. It wasn't much. Some books, a few photographs, a handful of treasured mementos. But it was all hers, and it felt good to finally take ownership of her surroundings. As she settled in, she began to make plans, things she had always wanted to do, but had never found the time or courage to pursue. She enrolled in an art class, something she had always dreamed of, but had pushed aside for years in favor of family obligations. She researched travel destinations, and for the first time, she allowed herself to think about where she wanted to go, not where everyone else needed her to be. It wasn't just about trips and activities. It was about rediscovering herself. Who was Elaine Matthews beyond the roles she had played for so long? Who was she when she wasn't a wife, a mother, a caretaker? She didn't have all the answers yet, but she was eager to find them. The phone rang one afternoon as she was sitting at her kitchen table, planning her next adventure. It was Clara, her steady friend, always there when she needed encouragement. "Elaine, how's the new place?" Clara asked, her voice warm, as always. "It's perfect," Elaine replied, a smile in her voice. "It's everything I've needed. Quiet, peaceful. I can finally breathe." "I knew you'd feel that way," Clara said, a note of pride in her voice. "You're building your life again, and it's not just about the house. It's about everything else that's coming next." Elaine nodded, looking around the room. The idea of what's next had felt like a distant concept for so long, but now it was within reach. "I'm really starting to see that. It's not just the house. It's about everything I've been holding inside, everything I've put off for everyone else." "You've got your whole life ahead of you, Elaine," Clara said gently. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're living." The words hit Elaine harder than she expected. She had been surviving for so long, navigating the needs of her family, putting her own desires on hold. But now, she was living. She was free to choose her own path, to build a life that wasn't defined by others' expectations. As time went on, she began to feel the changes inside herself. Her confidence grew as she stepped further into this new world. She joined a book club, something she had always wanted to do, and began learning new skills, like photography. She realized how much she had been missing, how much of herself had been buried under the weight of the years she spent trying to please others. One day, Sarah called. It had been a while since they had spoken, and Elaine felt a mix of apprehension and hope as she picked up the phone. "Elaine, I just wanted to check in," Sarah said, her voice cautious. "How are you? How's the new place?" "It's great, Sarah," Elaine replied, her voice steady. "It's exactly what I needed." There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again. "I'm glad you're doing well. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how things have been, and I wanted to apologize for not being there for you sooner. I should have stood up to David." Elaine's chest tightened at Sarah's words, but there was no anger in her heart. There was only the soft, tentative healing of broken pieces. "It's okay, Sarah. You've been in a difficult position, and I know that. But I'm glad we're talking about it now." "I'm trying to be better," Sarah said quietly. "I don't want to be stuck in the middle anymore." Elaine smiled, even though Sarah couldn't see it. "It's going to take time, but we'll get there." Over the next few months, the healing process continued, one small step at a time. David and Sarah began to rebuild their relationship with her, though Elaine knew it would take time. The wounds wouldn't heal overnight, and there would be more challenges ahead, but they were moving forward. Elaine reflected often on how far she had come. She had spent years in a holding pattern, waiting for something to change, but now she realized that the change had to come from within her. She was the one who had to make the decision to move forward, to leave behind what no longer served her. For the first time in years, she felt like she was becoming who she was always meant to be. And as she looked ahead, she felt a quiet excitement building within her. There was so much more to discover, so much more to live for. The next step was hers to take. And this time, she wasn't waiting for anyone to give her permission. Elaine stood outside the small storefront, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets, feeling the crisp morning air on her face. The sign above the door, "The Good Life Boutique," was freshly painted and gleaming, a reflection of her new start. It was a modest space, but it was hers, a symbol of the freedom she had fought so hard to claim. The shop was filled with light, the floorboards creaking underfoot as she walked through the space, taking in the arrangement of vintage furniture and carefully curated items. She had spent weeks planning, designing, and preparing. Now, as the first day of business loomed just hours away, she felt a nervous excitement surge through her chest. This was the beginning of something entirely new. Elaine had always wanted to open a store, something small and personal, a place where she could combine her love for antiques and design. But for years, she had pushed those dreams aside, convinced that family responsibilities and obligations were more important. Now, as she ran her hands over the counter she had refinished herself, she realized how much she had sacrificed to keep things together for everyone else. But not anymore. Elaine was reclaiming her life. She had invested time, energy, and money into this venture. And as she looked around, she realized she wasn't just starting a business. She was building a future she had always dreamed of, but never dared to make real. As she prepped the final details for the opening, the phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a text from Sarah. "Elaine, I know things have been tough, but I just wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. You're really doing it. I think we're starting to find our way through all of this, and I'm here for you." Elaine smiled, her fingers pausing over the screen. The distance between her and Sarah had been growing steadily, but it was good to see that Sarah was now taking steps to be there for her. It wasn't perfect, but they were moving forward. The apology had meant a lot, and now, seeing Sarah's support, Elaine could feel the last of the barriers starting to come down. She texted back, "Thank you, Sarah. It means the world to me. We'll get there, step by step." Just as she was about to put her phone down, another text came in, this time from David. She hesitated before reading it, feeling that familiar tension rise. Despite the small improvements in their relationship, there was still so much unresolved between them. Elaine, I've been thinking about things and I realize I've been a jerk. I want to make things right. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand your choice, but I respect it. You deserve to be happy. Elaine's chest tightened as she read the words. It wasn't an apology in the way she had hoped for all those years, but it was something real. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't sting. She didn't respond immediately. She had learned not to rush these moments, not to try to fill every silence with words. She would take this for what it was, a sign that David, too, was starting to shift. But the damage had been done, and while she could forgive him, she wasn't ready to forget. Instead of replying to his text, she turned her attention back to the shop. She had a meeting scheduled with the charity she had been getting involved with. It was something else she had always wanted to do: give back to the community, get involved in causes she cared about. The idea of volunteering, organizing local events, and using the shop as a way to support charities was exactly the kind of work she had dreamed of doing. The charity work helped balance her life in a way that felt fulfilling, and it connected her to a new circle of friends. These were people who didn't know her as a mother or a wife, or as someone constantly caught in the crossfire of family drama. They knew her as Elaine, the woman who had a passion for helping others, the woman who had a vision for her future. As the days passed, Elaine found herself drawn into more projects, organizing community fundraisers, helping local artists showcase their work, and even hosting small events at her boutique. Her days were full now, brimming with new experiences, new challenges. She was rediscovering a side of herself that had been hidden for too long, and it felt exhilarating. The store became a community hub, a space where people gathered, shared stories, and connected. Elaine's decision to embrace this new chapter had given her the freedom to explore the woman she had always been, beneath all the roles and expectations. Even as David's apology lingered in the back of her mind, Elaine knew she was moving forward. It wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about the family drama or the years spent in quiet desperation. It was about her. She was free to live for herself. One evening, after closing the shop, she sat at her kitchen table, a glass of wine in her hand, reflecting on how far she had come. Her past was filled with memories, some painful, some bittersweet, but they no longer defined her. They were part of her story, but they weren't the whole story. The family dynamic had started to shift, slowly but surely. David had stopped trying to control her decisions, and while the tension still lingered, it wasn't as suffocating as it had been. Sarah was becoming more supportive, and the wounds were beginning to heal. There would still be bumps along the way. There always were. But Elaine could finally look ahead with hope, something she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in ages, she realized she was living her life on her terms. She had made it through the hardest part, and now, the future felt wide open. The next step was hers to take, and she was ready to keep walking forward. Elaine sat in the small corner cafe, the sunlight filtering through the windows and casting soft shadows on the table in front of her. A cup of coffee sat untouched, steam curling lazily from the surface. Her mind wasn't on the coffee, though. It was on the conversation she had just had with Clara. "I don't know what I'm doing, Clara," Elaine had confessed earlier that day, her voice tinged with a vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "I feel like I'm finally figuring out who I am, but it's scary. I don't know what's next, and I don't want to mess it up." Clara had smiled softly, a knowing look in her eyes. "Elaine, you've already done the hardest part. You've taken control. The rest will fall into place. I promise." Elaine thought about Clara's words now, as she sat with her coffee. She was right. The hardest part had been taking that first step, letting go of the past and deciding to live for herself. But now, the path ahead was clearer, even though it was still uncertain. Since moving into her new life, Elaine had discovered a sense of freedom she'd never known before. She no longer had to carry the weight of family expectations or be defined by her past. She was beginning to understand that her journey was one of self-discovery, not just an escape. There was so much she had never allowed herself to explore, and now, with the space to breathe, she was learning to embrace new experiences and new opportunities. Elaine had taken up photography, something she had always admired but never thought she could pursue. Her days were spent capturing the beauty of the world around her, trees bathed in golden light, the architecture of the small town she had grown to love, the faces of the people she met through her work and charity events. Photography had become more than a hobby. It was a way for her to express the quiet joy that had bloomed inside her since making the decision to move forward. But it wasn't just about art. She had taken up yoga and began to travel, something she had dreamed of for years but never allowed herself to prioritize. Her first solo trip was to the coast, a quiet retreat where she spent her mornings walking along the beach, letting the sound of the waves clear her mind. It was on those walks that she felt truly at peace, letting the past wash away with the tide. And in this newfound peace, she began to look outward. She had spent so many years giving to others, trying to fix things for everyone else, but now she had the space to give to herself. She began volunteering more, offering her time and wisdom to people who were struggling with their own paths, just as she had once been. The sense of fulfillment she found in helping others became a new cornerstone of her life. Elaine became a mentor in the community, organizing workshops for women who, like her, had spent years living for others and now wanted to reclaim their own lives. She taught them how to set boundaries, how to find their voices, and how to believe that they deserve to live for themselves. Every time she spoke, she felt the power of her own words, knowing that she was speaking not just to others, but to the woman she had become. Over time, she saw the impact she was having. Women who had felt lost, invisible, began to rise. They took the lessons she shared and started building their own lives, more fulfilled, more independent. Elaine could see it in their eyes, the same spark of freedom she had found. But it wasn't just the women who had been touched by her wisdom. David had begun to change, too. Slowly but surely, he started to see the woman she had become. The tension between them had softened. His angry texts had become rare, replaced by more open, respectful communication. He still struggled with her decision, but he was learning to accept it. More importantly, he was learning to accept her. One afternoon, after a particularly moving conversation about their past, David said, "I don't think I fully understood what you were going through, Mom, but I see you now, and I respect you. I respect the strength it took to do what you did." Elaine had been taken aback by the honesty in his voice. The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. She knew their relationship would never be perfect, but in that moment, she realized how far they had both come. They had started to rebuild a bridge, slowly, carefully. Sarah, too, had stepped into her own. The healing between them had been gradual, but the distance between them had shrunk. They had started collaborating more, volunteering together, and even began hosting small charity events for causes they both cared about. They weren't the same as they once were, but they had found a new rhythm, one based on mutual respect and support. Elaine thought about how far she had come, how far they had all come. The past was still there, but it no longer defined her. It was part of her story, yes, but not the whole story. The future was hers to shape, and with each passing day she found herself becoming more and more comfortable with the idea that she was the one writing it. One afternoon, as she stood at the front of her boutique, preparing for an event she had organized to raise funds for local women's shelters, she realized how much she had changed. The woman who had once been buried under the weight of everyone else's needs was now someone who stood in the light, unapologetically living for herself. As the crowd gathered, Elaine smiled, watching the connections form around her. This, this was her new life, the future she had chosen. And in this moment she felt more at peace than she ever had before. The next step was still ahead of her, but this time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready for whatever came next. Elaine stood at the edge of the community center, watching the sun dip behind the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. The evening was quiet, the sounds of voices murmuring in the distance, but there was peace in the stillness. It had been a few months since the grand opening of the Good Life boutique, and even longer since she had sold the family house, the one that had been the epicenter of her world for so long. Now, as she looked around at the group of women gathered for another workshop she had organized, she realized something. This. This was the legacy she had built. It wasn't about the shop or the charity events. It wasn't about the house she had let go of, or even the strained relationships that had begun to heal. It was about the people she had touched. The lives she had changed, the way she had shown them, shown herself, that it was never too late to reclaim your own story. Her story had always been one of sacrifice, of living for others, of carrying the weight of everyone's expectations on her shoulders. But now, with each passing day, she was becoming the woman she had always dreamed of being. Free, independent, and unapologetically herself. David and Sarah were here tonight too, seated in the back of the room, watching her as she led a discussion on setting boundaries and building a life based on self-respect. It hadn't been easy. There had been many difficult conversations, and the rebuilding of trust was slow. But as she stood there now, talking to a room full of women about the importance of asserting your needs, she realized just how much progress they had all made. David's relationship with her had transformed over the past few months. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. After that pivotal conversation, where he had finally seen the strength it had taken for her to make the decision she had, their interactions had become more respectful. He had begun to understand that her choice wasn't just about leaving the house, it was about reclaiming her life. And now, as she watched him in the back of the room, quietly listening, she could see the change in him. He had stopped trying to control her decisions. He had started to respect her autonomy. There were still times when his old frustrations flared, but they were fewer and farther between. As for Sarah, their relationship had blossomed in unexpected ways. They had gone from being cautious and distant to becoming collaborators. They volunteered together, organized events for local women's shelters, and even spent quiet afternoons discussing everything from their hopes for the future to the pain they had both carried for years. There was still some distance, but it was a comfortable one, built on mutual understanding and respect. But it wasn't just her family that had benefited from Elaine's wisdom. The workshops, the charity events, the personal mentoring she provided, it all felt like the culmination of a life that had been lived in service to others for so long, finally redirected toward creating something positive. She had learned to set boundaries, to show up for herself, and in doing so, she had become a beacon of strength for others who had felt as lost as she once did. Women who had been stuck in toxic relationships, women who had put their own dreams on hold, found hope in her story. They came to her for advice, for guidance, and she gave it freely, teaching them how to find their own strength and independence. Elaine's heart swelled with pride as she looked around the room. The women gathered here were no longer just attendees of a workshop. They were a community. They had built something together, something that transcended the events she had organized or the lessons she had taught. They had built a network of support, one that didn't rely on sacrificing themselves for others, but on lifting each other up. When she had sold the house, it had felt like a loss. But now, as she stood here, she saw that it had been a necessary step. The house had been a symbol of her past, of all the years spent in silence, in compromise, and in living for everyone else. It had been filled with memories, yes, but it had also been weighed down by family conflict, by expectations that no longer served her. And now, as the proceeds from the sale helped fund scholarships for women in need, the house was no longer a place of pain. It was a symbol of how far she had come, how far they all had come. It wasn't a symbol of family dysfunction anymore. It was a reminder that everything could change, that anyone could choose to move forward and build something better. Elaine's life was now full of opportunities. She had spent years sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of her family, but now she was reaping the rewards of her decision. She had made new friends, people who didn't know her as someone's mother or wife, but as Elaine, the woman who had a vision for the future. She was traveling, teaching, mentoring, and living for herself. And for the first time in years, Elaine truly felt at peace. The future was still unfolding, but she was no longer afraid. She knew that whatever came next, she was ready. Her past no longer defined her. It had shaped her, yes, but it was no longer the foundation of her life. As the evening wore on and the room buzzed with conversation and laughter, Elaine took a moment to step outside onto the small balcony overlooking the community center. She looked up at the stars, feeling a quiet sense of contentment. Her journey had been long, but it had led her here, into a life she had built for herself. And as she looked out into the future, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had found her voice, her strength, and her place in the world. The legacy she had built wasn't just one of survival, it was one of thriving. Elaine smiled to herself. For the first time in a long time, she could truly say, "I am living my life on my terms." Elaine sat at her desk in the small office above the Good Life boutique, the soft hum of the street below drifting up through the open window. She had just wrapped up a meeting with a local charity, planning a new fundraiser for women's health programs, and now, as the afternoon sun poured through the window, she found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in the past year. The woman who had once felt invisible in her own home, who had spent years catering to the needs of others, was now firmly rooted in the life she had built for herself. She was no longer just Elaine, the wife, the mother, the caretaker. She was someone with a voice, someone with a purpose. She had transformed, and with that transformation came a deep sense of fulfillment. Yet, even as she felt the weight of her newfound peace, she couldn't ignore the fact that the path to this place hadn't been easy. It had been filled with difficult conversations, with moments of doubt, and with the painful necessity of cutting ties to the past. There were still moments when the past crept in, when she thought about the house, about the years spent trying to please everyone, about the guilt she'd carried for so long. But they were fewer now. With each day that passed, the weight grew lighter. David had been a constant presence in her life throughout this process, and their relationship, though far from perfect, had changed in ways that she never could have imagined. He had stopped fighting her decisions, stopped trying to control her actions, and for the first time, they were engaging in real conversations. There were still barriers between them, but they no longer felt insurmountable. David had sent her a message a few days ago, something that still resonated in her mind. "Mom, I want to thank you. I never understood what you were doing, but I get it now. I'm proud of you. I respect you." Those words, so simple but so powerful, meant more to her than he could know. It wasn't just about the apology or the understanding, it was the shift in him, the acknowledgement that her strength wasn't a threat to him, but something to be honored. She had spent so many years making sure he was happy, making sure he was taken care of, and for the first time, he was beginning to understand what it had cost her to do so. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of tension, but they were finding their way toward mutual respect. As for Sarah, their relationship had continued to evolve as well. She had been hesitant at first, unsure of how to navigate the shifting dynamics of the family. But now, after months of honest conversations, they were beginning to understand each other in ways they never had before. They had talked about their shared past, the things they hadn't said, the pain that had lingered between them. And for the first time, Sarah had truly started to embrace the lessons Elaine had taught her about self-respect and boundaries. One evening, Sarah had come over for a dinner at Elaine's new apartment. The two women had spent hours talking, laughing, and planning future collaborations. Sarah had even apologized for not standing up for her sooner. Elaine, in turn, had reassured her that there was no need for apologies. They were both on their own journeys, and they were walking them together now, in a way that felt balanced and empowering. Elaine looked around her office, the space filled with mementos of her new life. Books, photographs, trinkets she had collected along the way. She had transformed her workspace just as she had transformed herself. Every item on the shelves felt like a reminder of how far she had come. She had built something real here, something rooted in who she was, not who she had been expected to be. Her work in the community had flourished. The boutique was not just a store, it was a hub for connection, a place where women came together to share stories, to find strength in each other, and to discover their own potential. The workshops she led had empowered so many. She had become a mentor, a source of wisdom, and a beacon of hope for others who were struggling with the same issues she once had. But it wasn't just about the work she was doing. Elaine was living fully now, exploring new experiences, building deeper friendships, and making memories that were all her own. She had traveled to places she had only dreamed of before, quiet beaches where she spent hours reading, bustling cities where she got lost in the energy of new surroundings, and quaint villages where she connected with locals who reminded her of the power of simplicity. She wasn't waiting anymore. She wasn't holding back. Yet, even as she stood firmly in her new life, there was still the ever-present thought of what the future might hold. Elaine knew that life wasn't without challenges. There would always be unexpected twists and turns, but she was no longer afraid. For the first time, she understood that her journey was her own to shape. And then, one evening, as she sat at her kitchen table sipping tea and reflecting on the years that had passed, her phone buzzed. It was David again. She hesitated before reading the message, but something in her gut told her this one would be different. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything we've been through, and I just want you to know that I'm grateful for the strength you showed me. I've learned so much about what it means to live life on my own terms. You've changed me." Elaine felt a lump form in her throat. The journey with David had been long and painful, but this moment, was the final reckoning. Not just for him, but for her. She had spent so many years waiting for validation, for recognition, but she realized that this moment wasn't about her needing anything from him anymore. It was about how far they had both come, and how much they had learned. The past no longer defined them. They were both free to choose what came next. Elaine sat back in her chair, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. The road ahead was still full of possibilities, full of things she hadn't yet explored. But for the first time in a long time, she felt that deep sense of peace. She had built her legacy, not in the way she had once imagined, but in a way that felt far more fulfilling, by living for herself, by teaching others to do the same. The future, whatever it might hold, was in good hands. Elaine stood in the garden of her small home, her hands gently cupping a warm mug of tea as she breathed in the early morning air. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows over the blooming flowers and the freshly trimmed grass. It was quiet here, peaceful, unhurried, a stark contrast to the life she had lived for so long, one filled with noise, expectations, and the weight of everyone else's needs. But now, this life, her life, was hers to shape. It had taken time, years of struggle, but she had finally found the kind of peace she never thought possible. There was a stillness in her chest now, a quiet contentment that ran deeper than any external accomplishment. This peace was internal, unshakable, and it came from knowing she had built something real, something lasting. The boutique, the charity work, the workshops, all of these were just the outward expressions of the deep, quiet work she had done within herself. And as she sipped her tea and watched the world around her wake up, she realized she had never been more at ease with herself. There were no more doubts, no more second-guessing. She had stepped into her truth, and it felt like freedom. David had been a part of her life for so long, and though their relationship wasn't perfect, there was something solid between them now. They had both changed, grown, and learned. After years of tension, of misunderstandings, of him fighting to keep her in his old mold, David had finally accepted her for who she was. She wasn't just his mother anymore. She was Elaine, the woman who had found her own path, and he was learning to respect that. Their conversations were still cautious at times, but there was no more anger or resentment. They were talking now, really talking, sharing thoughts, feelings, and yes, sometimes even regrets. But all of it was rooted in a place of mutual respect. Elaine's relationship with Sarah had undergone a similar transformation. The walls that once separated them, built by years of silence and misunderstanding, had slowly crumbled. They had spent so much time finding common ground, apologizing, and learning how to be there for one another. But now, when they were together, there was ease. They spent afternoons shopping for vintage finds for the boutique, enjoying quiet dinners, and even traveling together. They had learned to enjoy each other's company without the underlying tension of old wounds. It was a relationship based on support, not obligation. And while they didn't have all the answers, the foundation they had built was strong. Elaine found herself surrounded by people who understood her now, not just as a mother or a wife, but as a person in her own right. She had come into her own, and it was clear that her choices had rippled out, affecting those around her in ways she had never imagined. Her legacy was not something she had planned, but it had been built naturally, layer by layer, through the lessons she had shared and the life she had led. She had become a mentor, not just to the women who came to her workshops, but to her family too. They had learned from her strength, her decision to choose herself, and her courage to move forward despite the obstacles. Elaine was now the embodiment of the lessons she had spent so long teaching: to live fully, to set boundaries, to prioritize one's own happiness. Her story had inspired those around her to do the same. Women who once felt invisible, stuck in lives defined by others' expectations, had come to her for advice, for guidance, and in doing so, they had found their own voices. They were standing up for themselves, taking risks, and building the lives they wanted, just as Elaine had. She continued to teach, to mentor, to share her wisdom with others. But the work wasn't just about giving back. It was also about keeping herself grounded, remembering why she had started this journey in the first place. She had to keep growing, keep evolving, just as she encouraged others to do. There were still new opportunities ahead, still more to learn, but Elaine had found joy in the process, in the unfolding of life. The quiet, fulfilling life she had always dreamed of was hers now. She spent her days with purpose, running the boutique, engaging in charity work, and enjoying her family's presence. She was no longer waiting for permission or approval from anyone. Her path was her own, and it was enough. Elaine was also spending more time on her personal projects. She had been published in a local art magazine for her photography, which was now gaining recognition. She loved capturing the world's simple, everyday beauty, seeing it through the lens of a camera instead of the lens of what was expected of her. When her phone buzzed with a message from Clara, she smiled as she read it. "You've created something beautiful, Elaine. You've not only changed your life, you've changed the lives of so many others. And that's what matters." Her heart swelled with pride. Clara had been there from the start, when things were messy, unclear, and filled with doubt. And now, years later, she was watching as Elaine's influence grew, her impact rippling out through her community. Elaine looked out over the garden again, a soft breeze lifting the strands of her hair. The future was still ahead of her. But for the first time in a long time, she felt certain that whatever came next, she was ready. There was no fear now, only excitement, because she knew that peace, true, unshakable peace, was hers. She had earned it. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Elaine took another deep breath and smiled to herself. She had built this life with purpose and intention, and it was exactly what she had always dreamed of. And now, with the love of her family, the respect of those around her, and the freedom to keep growing, she was finally at peace. Elaine sat in her favorite chair by the window, the soft light of the late afternoon casting a warm glow over the room. Outside, the garden she had lovingly tended bloomed with vibrant colors, and the world outside was still and peaceful. For a long time, the outside world had felt chaotic, noisy, and overwhelming, but now it was different. She had created this life, this sense of calm, and it felt like a victory that went beyond money, beyond accolades, beyond the things she once thought would define her. Her victory wasn't in the boutique's success, or the recognition her photography was now getting, or even in the charity events she'd helped orchestrate. It was in the quiet, unshakable peace she had found within herself. It was in the way she could sit in her home, without the nagging weight of regret or the pull of past obligations, and know that she had finally created the life she had always deserved. It had taken years of sacrifice, of painful decisions, but now she was living for herself, and that was worth more than anything money could buy. Elaine's heart swelled with pride as she thought of the women she had mentored, the people who had come to her for guidance and left empowered to take control of their own lives. She had given them more than advice, she had given them permission. The permission to set boundaries, to live unapologetically, to prioritize themselves. And they had flourished, just as she had. The workshops, the conversations, the one-on-one mentorships, they had all been part of her own healing process. She had shared her story, and in doing so, she had created a ripple effect that touched more lives than she could have ever imagined. Her journey wasn't just about rebuilding herself, it was about helping others rebuild their lives too. Her legacy was not just in the work she had done, but in the lives she had changed and the strength she had passed on. David and Sarah were thriving now too. Their relationship with her had transformed in ways that felt both gradual and profound. They had learned the importance of boundaries, of respect, and most importantly, of understanding the strength it took for Elaine to take the steps she had. David, in particular, had come so far. The young man who had once resented her choices, who had felt threatened by her independence, had now become a man who understood her. He had learned to honor her decisions, to see her not as his mother, but as an equal. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in their relationship, there was no anger, no bitterness, just mutual respect. Sarah, too, had grown. There had been times when Elaine worried that Sarah would never fully embrace the changes she had made. But over time, Sarah had come to understand what Elaine had been teaching her all along, that it was okay to put yourself first. She had found her own voice, her own strength, And together, the two women had built something beautiful. Their relationship was built on support now, not obligation, and Elaine knew that their bond would only grow stronger with time. Elaine thought about the years that had passed. How many times had she put herself last? How many times had she held back, allowed herself to be defined by others, until one day, she simply couldn't anymore. It had been a long road, full of painful truths and difficult decisions, but it had led her here, into a life of fulfillment, peace, and independence. The quiet fulfillment of her life was not a life of complacency, though. She was still actively creating, still mentoring, still pouring her energy into the work she loved. But now, it wasn't out of obligation. It was because she wanted to. Every decision, every step she took, was aligned with who she was becoming, not who others wanted her to be. And that, she realized, was the true victory. As she sat in the stillness of her home, a sense of deep satisfaction settled over her. She had finally made peace with the past. She had let go of what didn't serve her and embraced the future, open and uncertain as it was. The family she had once been bound to by guilt and duty was now a family she had chosen to stay connected to, based on love and respect. She had been a mother, a wife, a caretaker, and had given everything to those roles. But now, she was simply Elaine, a woman living for herself, building her legacy on her own terms, and that, more than anything, was her final victory. Elaine reflected on the journey, how far she had come, how much she had learned, and how far the people she loved had come with her. She could feel the weight of it all settling into her bones. Her past was no longer an anchor holding her back. It was the foundation on which she had built her future. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Elaine felt a quiet assurance. Whatever came next, she knew she was ready. She had done the work. She had built something lasting. And now, with the peace she had fought so hard to find, she stood at the edge of her legacy, knowing that no one could ever take her peace again. Her journey wasn't over, but she had already won.